The sunroof with the stars.
This is an all-time low.
All-time low. Had to put the brakes on, throw him out of the car. It was ridiculous. And he can't keep humiliating Kevin like this in the studio.
Just a little. Come on, there's no need to argue anymore.
That's a great song. That's a great album.
What secondary school did Brian attend?
Oh, private. They didn't ship you out today. They didn't ship you to the south side for a better education. Me and you are finished. If you jumped on a bus and went down the coast road and out to the south of Dublin for education, come on. I don't know. I'll just go with Clontarf. Yeah. This is awful stuff. This is desperate. Turn this thing off.
Welcome back, Kenny Cunningham. Makes everything a bit better. So we're reviewing the Sunday papers. We have Cliona Foley, sports journalist and Off the Bench podcast presenter. Kieran Cunningham as well, Chief Sportswriter with the Irish Daily Star, both in situ. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon, Joe. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Cliona.
Thanks for making time for us. So the back pages in no particular order. The Mail on Sunday firstly go with Game On here, as you can see, and it's a story about Arsenal. Picture Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Arsenal going back training tomorrow. Arsenal lead the way as training begins amid TV talks on free-to-air games. So Rob Draper here. Arsenal back in training with a number of Premier League clubs also pushing to return in the biggest sign yet that the Premier League season will restart very soon. The Star, same story. It's Arsenal again, back in business. Gunners first in training as season return ramps up. Arsenal will return to their training base from Monday, and also Kev at Toon Target. Kevin Keegan being lined up to make what the Star says is an emotional return to St James's Park. Idolised as the Messiah, will be invited to take up an ambassadorial role when the £300 million takeover is complete. We have back page of The Sun then, and this is Crocky Horror Show. So the likes of Hugo Lloris and Declan Rice warning that if we go back too soon without enough preparation, then you'll have a smattering of players with injuries. And actually above that, quarter pounded, Grealish agrees 25% pay deferral. Aston Villa players have agreed a 25% wage deferral for 4 months. Sunday Mirror then, again, it's the Kevin Keegan story, Toon return for the Messiah. And then beneath that, Ruud Gullit saying it's inevitable big clubs will go bust. This is what they describe as Gullit's grim prediction if season isn't finished. Simon Mullock here. Ruud Gullit has warned the Premier League clubs will go bust if the season is cancelled. It's been estimated the world's richest league will lose £1.3 billion in TV revenue, sponsorship, cash and ticket money. Again, we were just saying earlier, there's no need to cancel the season, just postpone it as long as it takes. Sunday World, near starting post. This is John Brennan in the Sunday World. Racing hopes to be the first elite sport to make return in Ireland. Horse racing hoping to be the first sport to get back into elite action, maybe as soon as this day fortnight, if the government lifts the 2K restriction on movement imposed because of the COVID-19 pandemic, writes John Brennan. And then finally, the Sunday Independent. Big picture here. John Green's main lead is wipeout, ? And he is talking about the return or non-return of sport this year. Beneath that, one very big story, certainly. GAA player fails drugs test. Alongside that, they have Chelsea hit wall on pay cuts. That's Chelsea and their 10% pay cut happening or not happening, we're not too sure. But GAA player fails drugs test is the headline which catches the eye, obviously. John Green with this story. It's an exclusive in the Sunday Independent, and he writes that an inter-county Gaelic footballer has failed a drug test, the Sunday Independent understands. The player allegedly failed the test after a National Football League game in February. The player, who is in his 30s, was tested after the recent game as part of Sport Ireland's anti-doping programme. The piece goes on to say that the player in question has recently removed himself from the county squad's WhatsApp group. It's understood some members of the inter-county panel in question have become aware of the failed test in recent days, and the matter is now being investigated by Sport Ireland. There isn't any real information beyond that. The GAA and the Gaelic Players Association, both in receipt of government funding, while inter-county footballers and hurlers receive grants each year, John writes, so compliance with Sport Ireland's anti-doping code is a core condition of this funding. This is the player is the third Gaelic footballer since 2015 to have failed a drugs test. Thomas Connolly in June of 2015, and then Brandon O'Sullivan in April of 2016 in Kerry. There is one quote from Sport Ireland. Yesterday, a spokesperson for the GAA referred queries on this latest adverse finding to Sport Ireland. A spokesperson for Sport Ireland said, Sport Ireland does not make any comment on any potential anti-doping process which may or may not be underway. In general terms, where an anti-doping process is underway, Sport Ireland will communicate the outcome of that process only at the conclusion. Representatives, writes John Green, of the Players County Board had not responded to queries at the time of going to print yesterday, and the manager of the team in question could not be contacted yesterday. That effectively is the whole story as outlined there. I think very quickly, almost immediately, in fact, we're into the realm of speculation and talking without enough information to do so when we don't really know what's gone on here. So we might just leave that at that for the time being. It's a massive story, obviously. It's on the front page there, the Sunday Independent. One presumes we'll get more information in due course, and Sport Ireland, we contacted them as well today, and they gave us the same line that they had given the Sunday Independent. So
Joe,
that's where we are on that story.
Sorry, Joe, I understand we can't comment on it, but I think it's just worth giving John Green credit for getting this story. There aren't many news stories over the last 5 or 6 weeks since we've gone into where we are with no sports. And I think as far as I remember, when the Kerry player Brendan O'Sullivan failed the test 4 years ago, it was John that got the story as well. So he obviously has good contacts there, and it's rare that people are getting good news stories. Well, it's not a good news story, but you know what I mean. It's a strong news story. So full credit to him.
Absolutely, agreed. Front page.
The other thing I have to say, Joe, is that in case people don't understand the process, but that's everything that's been described there is status quo. That's how this thing works. You fail a drug test, you're informed, you get the chance to get your test, get it checked, then you go into disciplinary. So the Sports Council, the GAA, nobody will make any comments until all of that has been done. So actually, as Kieran says, if somebody breaks a story that somebody's failed a test, that's that's usually a very good source. But nothing will be confirmed until the whole disciplinary procedure has been gone through, and that can take months and months and months.
Okay, well, we're at the early stages of that, to say the least. That's page one of the Sunday Independent. Also on page one, I know you both picked out John's piece about looking ahead to the future of sport in this country in particular. Cliona, what jumped out at you about this? The byline is, instead of mourning, sport needs to imagine a different future, maybe even an opportunity. Yeah,
and I think this is John is the sports editor of the Sunday Indo, and it's a good editorial piece, because it's funny, over the last few weeks, we work in sport, we're obsessed by sport. So many people are, even, as a diversion, it's not their job. But you do have to ask the question, which I keep asking myself, I suppose, over the last few weeks, is if sport doesn't come back this summer, what of it? What difference is it actually going to make to our lives? I think that's a really interesting debate. And John's point as well is that if it does come back, it's going to look like something very different. And we shouldn't really, given the health implications, the importance of this for people's, health, not to mind their lifestyles, and maybe as well for some people, obviously, their income. But if it comes back, does it have to look like it normally does? And if it doesn't look like that, then what's wrong with that? And there's a couple of people quoted in it, including some of the people who've been quoted over the last few weeks. I suppose Professor Sam McConkey is one of them, making that point, that saying if it comes back, it's not going to look like it was before. In most sports, it's not going to look like that. And maybe we all have to adjust our minds and figure out, if that happens, then, let's relax. Because, I've been thinking about this a lot, and you wonder and you think, so much of sport is done by volunteers. They're all stuck at home, can't do anything, can't volunteer, and they're the bedrock of sport. And so, if they're all happy to say, okay, it doesn't happen, then we all say, well, it doesn't happen. It seems to me there's this obsession with everybody saying it has to come back, it has to come back. Why does it have to come back? And professional sport, I can understand the reasoning behind somebody, and there's some really good pieces about that today, we'll talk about them later, about who is arguing for these professional sports to come back on who's to gain by it, if you like. But I think there is an interesting debate if it comes back, as and he talks about, we know that Brendan O'Brien had a good piece in the Examiner yesterday, like we know the GA contacted all the county boards this week and said, look, we're not sure what's going to happen, but one of the things you have to do is prepare that the club championship may come back in a different form, and you need to maybe have a plan B or plan C for your club championship that you can run it off in a short space of time. And for me, I think realistically, even to think that we get a club championship this summer may be the most realistic thing in GA terms.
Sam McConkey, by the way, Professor Sam McConkey, and it's amazing actually. The likes of Sam McConkey, Luke O'Neill, Killian DeGascon, they're all going to be on Dancing with the Stars in about 2 years. They're these massive household names. It's such a part of our lives right now. So Sam McConkey says it'll be sport specific. Take rugby, physical contact, so intrinsic in rugby and rucking, tackling, scrummaging. It's really hard to envisage a sport like rugby with social distancing in place. Whereas there is renewed hope, as John says, for the likes of golf, running, cycling perhaps, but certainly even, Kieran, he says, not in competition. I mean, if golf comes back, if cycling comes back, if running comes back, it won't be in competition. It might just be on a very, very, very local level with you and a friend and not much else.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's excuse me, strangely enough, Sam McConkey's on the board of my son's primary school, so he's somebody I used to see on the school run, and suddenly he's become a national figure in the space of a few weeks, which is kind of disconcerting. But I think that the overall tone of John Green's piece, I agree with, in that there's a lot of people out there that kind of think we'll go back to normal. The sport will go back to normal in a few months or a year, or whatever. I don't think it'll ever go back to what we think of as normal. I think this will have changed sport radically. I was chatting to Ryan Nugent a few weeks ago, and Ryan was very well tuned into the economics of sport, from negotiating rights deals for RTE. And he says the impact on the finances alone of the TV companies and all the sports organisations and clubs, etc., that it will have a seismic impact. But I can see things like, I don't think a lot of people have countenanced them yet, in that when we do go back, like we've often talked about going to a game in Croke Park and it's half full and there's not much atmosphere. I don't think when spectators are allowed in, that capacity crowds will be allowed for a long, long time, that there will be some form of distancing put in place. I have a feeling that people in the most vulnerable groups, which are people with underlying conditions and over 70, will not be allowed to go to sporting events. And that would impact even on, when you consider some of the age or profile of some people who are involved with teams, whether it's medical staff or managers or county board officials in various sports, etc. I think this is the ultimate game changer. And I think John, from the people he talks to, gets to the core of that. That sport, when it comes back, is going to be more of a leisure pursuit. To get back, elite sport is going to take a long time to get back to anything like it was.
Until a vaccine, really.
Yeah, I think so. And nobody knows. Like, I know people are jumping on things that there's so many different studies going on. Some people saying, it could be one by September. But Ebola vaccine took 5 years. So nobody knows really how long this will take. You look at cancer. How much money has been put into trying to find a cure for cancer? No, nobody's been able to. So just thinking we will magically, within a year, we'll definitely have a vaccine. Like you see now already, people are saying the Tokyo Olympics mightn't take place next year. And if it does go ahead next year, that there'll be no support, there'll be no spectators. So that's another 15 months down the line. So nobody really knows where we are. And I do see, like there's another piece in the Sunday Indo where, Dermot Crowe, where a lot of people within the GA are looking for what they call clarity, and they want to know when they're coming back. Nobody can say that. First of all, it's not the GA's call. The GA can't make that decision. It will be made for them at government level and by medical experts.
Yeah. Philip Lanigan has an interview with Liam Griffin, and he says something pretty similar to the point you made, Cliona, at the outset about the return of sport in the midst of this far more serious situation. So Liam Griffin, everybody knows Liam, 1996 Wexford hurling manager and hotelier, and he was on the show during the week actually with Diarmuid Ling doing the Wexford Mount Rushmore. But he's always a bastion of good sense and I think positivity and a can-do attitude, and he says, with this COVID thing, I love that, with this COVID thing, we have two choices. He said, we can whinge all day or we can look into the challenge. We're staying indoors to save lives. We're not staying indoors because people want us to have a bad time. I want my neighbours to be alive when I come out the door. I want my children to be alive. I want everybody else's children to be alive. If we want to be reckless about this and think negatively, we want to get out of the house. If our people on the front line are doing such a fantastic job and putting their lives on the line, we can help by saving lives ourselves. He says, for me to give up hurling for the summer, no problem. If it's going to save lives, first choice lives, and that's it.
Yeah, and I mean, as you say, a bastion of good sense always, Griffin, as well as being always very entertaining. But like, I think, I think a lot of people feel like that. I come across people occasionally. I came across somebody yesterday, Man United fan, saying, "Oh God, if Liverpool to win, and I hope it's cancelled and all the rest." And I'm thinking, God, life is more important than that. You know what I mean? And Griffin has always had, and that's what made him particularly special, I think, was as a manager, was that he understands the passion of sport, but he also understands that it is just one facet of life. And there's a great line in this where he says, "I carry Wexford everywhere I go." Now, that's not maudlin nonsense, the Padraig Pearceism, and I'll die for Wexford tomorrow morning. I wouldn't throw a stone for freedom. And this, remember, is the man who stopped the team, famously on the way to Croke Park, and managed to link into that, fierce passion and nationalism. But he's saying that point. He says, it isn't life and death right now. I mean, isn't that the reality? And all the famous managerial quotes that you hear, about sport. But actually, it isn't life and death, and it shouldn't be life and death. And I'm amazed, to see things like Arsenal play. Arsenal are meant to be going back training tomorrow, aren't they?
Yeah.
And that's what some of the papers are saying today. There's some really good pieces about professional sport, and there's some really good pieces. James Sharp in the Mail on Sunday has a really interesting piece about the Bundesliga. I don't know whether you looked at that piece, but actually breaks down exactly how the Bundesliga is planning to go back. And included are things like, the players will stay in hotels. And you're going, hold on a second, who's cleaning those hotels? Or if players are training, even if it's limited numbers, and even if they've been tested and we're not so sure how long the virus lasts or how long immunization lasts, are they going home to families where people have, health problem or a pregnant wife or whatever? What are the real health risks here on an individual basis, even for professional athletes if they're asked to go back? It's a really interesting, I think, and an interesting moral debate and a philosophical debate.
Yeah, I don't understand this self-imposed pressure on, say, the Premier League, if that's, if we're talking about Arsenal going back. I don't understand why they're in such a rush to go back. There's no need. They can just push this season into next season, no problem. They have the summer of 2022 free in a way that they wouldn't usually, courtesy of the Qatar World Cup. They don't have to declare the season null and void. They can just finish it in September or October or November, or if it needs be December, and then restart the next season 2 or 3 weeks after that. I'm sure the smart people in the Premier League could come up with various models to finish a Premier League season in 3 months or 4 months or 5 months or whatever they might need to cram it into and make the necessary adjustments. This business of a June 30th deadline and we have to get back behind closed doors, the TV money will come back. All of these clubs can borrow against future earnings. Money costs nothing at the moment. The Bank of England will print it up for them double quick. They can borrow against future income, which will come back very soon. TV money will be the first thing back, not gate receipts. As Roy Keane said during the week, half of these clubs are owned by billionaires anyway. The notion, and Wayne Rooney used the phrase guinea pigs at the outset of this crisis, the notion that there is this need to get back and get this thing done before the end of July or the end of June. It's all self-imposed, it's all just imagined.
Yeah, when you look at the timetable as well, Joe, that they're talking about, effectively they're talking about the Premier League finishing and the new season starting 3 weeks later.
Well, why?
Why? How can that, from a player welfare point of view, they're going to cram, if this goes ahead, cram 9 games into a really short period of time, then give them 3 weeks to get prepared for new season. So you're just flogging the players that way. And the other thing that's important to remember, Joe, is our experience of previous pandemics, or what we've read or what we've heard about, the particularly Spanish flu, the second wave is far more severe. So there's a fair chance that in September or October or November, leagues will be abandoned again.
Yeah.
So I don't understand the urgency. I think they seem to be clinging on to this thing that, it's going to be okay, we'll get it done. It's going to be normal in August and we start as normal. There's not a chance it's going to be as normal in August.
No,
And that's John Green's point, isn't it? That's not normal. We have to start rethinking about what normal is anymore. Like we know, racing, I know Irish racing, they seem to be very, very, they're the ones probably being most positive in thinking they can get back to a limited form of it if a new deadline is announced after May 5 by the government. And I said this before, there is an argument there. Like I live near the Curragh, and on my 2K, exercise every day, I pass guys. I pass horses being exercised on a small gallop, because horses need to be exercised and staff need to be employed, and they're trying to keep their stable staff in work. But, there are probably questions to be asked around that. And even if it does come back behind closed doors, who's going to benefit? But you do have to probably exercise. But in the other sport, I can't. There's a good piece by Paul Wilson in The Observer and in the Sindo today. It's carried in the Sindo. And it's about football football is living in the bubble too long is the headline. And he's saying, everyone knows the real desire to see leagues completed and matches played behind closed doors comes from the money men anyway. And who are the money men? And that's what you have to ask. And, there's some great pieces today, really, I suppose, that indicate to you who the money men are. But like this notion, there's 92 outstanding games in the Premiership, and that's worth 762 million in TV revenue. And his point is, are we all supposed to be in this crisis together? Then surely BT and Sky, who disclosed profits of 2 billion and 1.2 billion in their most recent results, should not be holding the game to ransom. So, there's a big debate here, and I think a really interesting one about, Premier League is untenable. We've seen how untenable it is. I read one of the pieces today. Norwich made 123 million this year. 93 million that came from TV, and they've already spent 125 million. Yeah. So, what is the point of such a bloated, untenable, unless you bring in some kind of a salary cap or do something with the Premier League, what the sort of money washing around, it's just insane. And everybody now has a chance, I think, including players, owners, TV and everybody else, to say, hold on, could we remodel this some way and make it, so that you can afford to be our own, or follow a football team for reasonable money.
Yeah, no, there are good points.
Think about what it might be like though as well. Like Liverpool needs 6 points to win the title. If City lose again, they'll only need 3 points. So if they win the title after 2 of their 9 games, what are they going to do for the last 7 games in front of no spectators? Are they going to have any incentive? They're just going to go through the motions. Players will want to go back to their families. They won't want to be cocooned in a hotel or training camp for 7 games that really mean nothing to them. It doesn't mean that much to them to get to 100 points or whatever. They just want to win the title. They won it after the 2 games, which they probably would do. It's just a non-event.
Yeah. To round off those initial few pieces we've been talking about, Liam Griffin, you might be wondering how the business is going for him. Obviously, it's very difficult. He says, a hotelier, as I mentioned, a lot of people I work with every day, I miss them. I miss them like holy hell. I can't believe how much I miss them. So that whole social side is taken away. He says, Michael and Anthony, his sons, have sat down and looked at our business. Where do we go from here? We're looking to go positively from here. How do we build from this? How difficult is it for a business like ours? It's terribly difficult. We've just come out of a massive financial recession, which was not of our making. We had to fight to get our own business back, and we did. We survived it. My 2 lads are 4th generation in the hospitality business. My grandmother and mother, during the economic war, started one of the first farm guest houses in Ireland in my mother's home place. So we have all those generations. And he's talking, not surprisingly, about how monumentally difficult this is going to be for the tourism industry, for the hotelier industry, for restaurants. He says, the fog needs to lift. Only then will people have confidence to come out. Even if tomorrow you partially open, how do you partially open a hotel? And that's one of the challenges facing all these industries. I don't know. Simon Harris said last week, we can't have packed pubs until effectively there's a vaccine.
Yeah, and sport, we're talking about sport, and we're talking largely here probably about competitive sport, if you like, which is a huge industry, but it's an industry like every other. I heard Brody, what's his name, the guy involved with Camille Thai, the restaurateurs are arguing that they should be a special case, and that they should get special case. Sport will make that argument as well, that it should be a special case. But Mary O'Connor yesterday in the Examiner had, she's the head of the Federation of Irish Sport, who's often been with ye, and she made the point, sport volunteerism in Ireland is arguably worth 1.1 billion, and they say for every €100 invested in sport, the government gets back 195 in taxes. Now, loads of other industries will make similar arguments, but if it's you're talking about club level, so you're saying clubs have lost between 60 to 100% of their revenue, but they're still paying 85% of their cost on things like insurance and all that sort of stuff. So, and paying for grounds that they own, and paying mortgages or whatever else it is. So it is an intriguing thing, but in some ways you hope that this crisis will make people rethink about the value of sport and what really is valuable and where the money should be spent. It's really interesting. Like, wasn't it just February where we were reading all those articles about how much money county boards spend?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It looks ludicrous now.
Doesn't it look ludicrous?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, especially considering the recession and probably depression that we're all facing into. Got to take a short break, and we're back with Cliona Foley and Kieran Cunningham. We're reviewing the papers after 2 o'clock news headlines.
Join the conversation. Text us on 53106. Texts cost 30 cents.
COVID-19 is a major public health emergency here in Ireland and around the world. It's having a big impact on every aspect of our lives. We are now asked to stay at home with limited exceptions. This is especially hard for older people and those who've been advised to cocoon. Being isolated from friends and family is hard for everyone. So right now, it's important that we look out for each other and look after our neighbours. That's why national government, local government and the community and voluntary sectors have all come together to create the Community Call. To make sure that anyone who needs help can get help. And to make sure that people who would like to volunteer in their community can help where they are most needed. If you need help, if you know someone who needs help, or if you'd like to offer help, please call 0818 222 024 or call your local authority Community Call helpline. All the details are live now at gov.ie. Supported by the Government of Ireland.
This Irish success story is brought to you by Guaranteed Irish.
Who would have thought from humble beginnings in a small-town butcher shop in the 1880s that Clonakilty black pudding would be exported around the world today? Supporting 50 jobs in the seaside town of West Cork, this family business and its famous recipe has become a local treasure, putting Clonakilty on the global food map. Guaranteed Irish helps you support companies that are altogether better choices for our communities. So look out for it. GuaranteedIrish.ie. Altogether better.
Shopping. It's a bit different these days. Here are some handy hints from Dunnes Stores to help customers shop quicker and safer. Make a list before you go shopping so you can move quicker through the store and avoid browsing. If you are shopping for others, please ask us for help. To avoid queues, shop throughout the day and into the evening. We restock our shelves often, so no need to only shop early. Last but not least, always keep 2 metres between yourself and other shoppers. Dunnes Stores, always here for our customers.
Cancer doesn't stop, and neither will we. The Irish Cancer Society's support line is open every day to help anyone worried or affected by cancer. For information on any cancer-related issue, including concerns about coronavirus, advice on financial or employment matters, or to arrange free cancer counselling, please call us. Get in touch at free phone 1800 200 700 or at cancer.ie. Apart, but not alone.
Screen Time with John Fardy.
With Elephant and Castle.
On News Talk.
Listen and subscribe to the podcast now on newstalk.com or on the News Talk app.
Get with the programme. Update the News Talk app now in the App Store or Google Play Store. On 106 to 108 FM, on newstalk.com, on smart speaker and on the News Talk app. This is News Talk.
It's 2 o'clock. Good afternoon. The HSE says it hopes to be able to carry out 100,000 tests a week for COVID-19 by the third week in May. It follows agreement between the Department of Health and the HSE on a new model to scale up capacity. An increased demand for testing is expected over the coming week due to changes in the case definition. 10,000 daily tests can currently be carried out. HSE CEO Paul Reid explains how they plan to increase that figure.
First of all, we've looked at the handover between when the swab is taken and that's transmitted then to a laboratory for testing. Also looking at the number of staff that we will need in our swabbing centres, looking at automation in the process, and then finally scaling up the volume capacity of the labs.
The Irish Dental Association is accusing the government of ignoring the effective collapse of the profession due to COVID-19. Chief Executive Fintan Howrahan says dentists need urgent help.
Dentists are continuing to do their best, but there's been a huge fall off in dental attendance. There's a financial catastrophe facing dentistry right now, and we are begging for support from the state.
3 men are being questioned in connection with the €2.5 million drug seizure in Dublin. Gardaí found the cocaine after stopping and searching 3 cars in Blake's Cross yesterday afternoon. The 44, 48 and 59-year-olds are being questioned at 2 Dublin Garda stations. Plans to increase the pension age to 67 next year have been postponed as part of government formation talks. The change was due to take place in January. Fianna Fáil leader Micheál Martin says there will be a transition pension for 65-year-olds until they can claim the state pension of 66. Former government advisor Gerard Howlin doesn't think it's a good idea.
To go on with this in a situation where fewer workers are going to have to bear the cost of more pensioners, where the country is plunging into deep levels of debt, I mean, this is a really, really bad sort of politics. It's going to do awful damage.
And US intelligence agencies are looking into reports about the health of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. There's been speculation he could be seriously ill after missing the anniversary celebrations for the country's founding father and his grandfather. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany says officials are trying to find out more.
We're definitely aware of those reports. The intelligence community is looking very closely at that. We don't have any updates on that at this time. The intel community is certainly looking at it.
It's 2 minutes past 2.
News Talk Weather.
Thanks to the AA. To help in these challenging times, we've reduced the cost of our car insurance. Get our lowest price at the AA.ie.
Cloudy in most areas today. There will be some rain and drizzle, turning heavy in places. Highest temperatures 11 to 16 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
Off the ball. This is News Talk.
Hello there, you're very welcome back. We have Kieran Cunningham and Cliona Foley reviewing the Sunday papers. We're up and running. We've gone through a couple of front pages. Just before we get into the James Cronin story, Cliona, I know you wanted to touch on, if we're talking about Liam Griffin as somebody who's immersed in GAA and everything that's good about community and GAA, then Sean McGoldrick was writing about the Do It For Dan campaign, which is an extraordinary story. I heard Dan's parents interviewed, I think it was about 2 months ago, and I think it was the Sean O'Rourke show at the time, and they were at the beginning of their journey where they were just a very, very normal family like any of us who somehow needed to raise 2 million. And I do remember thinking they're up against it here. This is going to be incredibly difficult to raise $2 million. And here we are, I would think, just a couple of months later. And
well, it's
been
actually 49 days, Joe,
49
which is amazing.
days, wow.
49 days is incredible, and it just for me captures, like, I know there's so many awful stories at the moment, but actually it's a good news story, and also I think really underlines how unifying sport is and how unifying the GA is, because people probably mostly know at this stage, but Niall Donoghue played football for Laois, and his wife Aisling Quigley played football for Laois. So what really interests me about this is that it was cross-gender, cross-sport, because other sports got involved as well. But for people to have done this incredible amount of fundraising for them, for their little boy to get this particular treatment in America, in 49 days is extraordinary. And that would not have happened without the COVID virus, would it? And also, I think is really interesting as well is, even though 3 different organisations run Gaelic games in this country, the ladies football, the camogie and the GAA, really it is one family, and everybody who's in clubs knows it's one family, and it really to me raises that interesting question about when will that family be reunited, and will they all be under one banner and run by one organisation, because the response to Do It For Dan shows that it is one family, it really is.
And is there a desire on both parts to bring all the organisations under one umbrella, Cliona?
Well, I know, somebody, Leishman Liam O'Neill, when he was president, is somebody who has talked about the integration. There is an agreement there in principle now from Camogie and football and GA, but it is not. It will not be a simple thing to do, because you have to basically take away two administrations and create a new administration, and I think that's a long way down the road. But what I do know is that amongst female GA players or Gaelic players, there is a desire that they feel that if it was an integrated organisation, they would benefit from it in a lot of ways, not only access to funding, but access to facilities, and just also access to being in a position to affect power and change. So I think there is, from players definitely, and particularly this current generation of young players in women's camogie, football and camogie, there does seem to be a desire to be one part of one organisation.
Okay. We'll turn to page 3 of the Sunday Independent. James Cronin's ban emerged on Monday evening. There were statements from Cronin himself, from Munster Rugby, from the IRFU, and obviously from the ECPR, who conducted the investigation via Anthony Davies, an independent judicial member of the EPCR. And Brendan Fanning is writing about it here, reflecting on the week that was. Certainly in his opening paragraph, Kieran, where he's remembering a year ago when Munster were beaten by Saracens in the semi-final of the Heineken Champions Cup, and memorably Billy Vunipola had said some crazy things on Twitter and was abused by a Munster fan, and Munster were asked about it. I think Johan van Graan was asked about it afterwards, and the question was dismissed by a member of Munster staff who said there was no proof that it had been one of the Munster fans. And Fanning says of that response to that question, embarrassed silence. Next question. He says he was reminded of that this week because the point is that he doesn't feel perhaps Munster said enough about this or did enough about this, that a couple of statements and a bit of a ribbon put in the whole thing on Monday, and that's it, put to bed. And it is obviously incredibly serious anytime any player fails a doping test.
Yeah, obviously we have to be very careful how we talk about this for legal reasons, because there's so many different elements involved between the player, between the disciplinary body, between Munster and between the pharmacy. So be careful not to identify anybody or not to imply something happened that we don't know happened. But the circumstances are very strange. Like, a lot of people will be in regular medication, and I would be one of those. And when you're regular medication, often your prescription is emailed to you. And every time I go to the pharmacy, I'm asked for my address. So that there are things put in place so that you get the right medication. But it seems that James Cronin was handed a prescription that was meant for a different James Cronin and given a banned substance that he then took before, that day, took 5 tablets, and he took the following day before a game as well, and that he didn't question what he was given or that it was the right prescription. And he has been cleared of liability by this, that they're saying that they have documentation with the pharmacist and the pharmacy made the error. But it's just such a strange confluence of circumstances that there would be 2 James Cronins that both would have a prescription to be collected that day, and one would include a performance-enhancing substance that is banned. And I can see, the one thing I think about is that he's ended up getting a month's ban because they say he has some liability. They should be careful with what he takes. Mm-hmm. But if this was an athlete, a track and field athlete or a cyclist, I know from talking to athletes, and Cliona knows, Cliona's dealt with athletics long enough, they feel that team sports get more leeway, people in team sports, that they would think if this happened with an athlete, they would not get away with a month's ban when there is no sport.
Well, on the report, Anthony Davies' report, effectively, he outlines Cronin's version of events, team doctor feeling unwell, the doctor emails the prescription for the antibiotics. I think people are fairly familiar with the story at this stage. We covered it in depth across 30 minutes, myself and Rory O'Connor on Wednesday, if you want to listen back to that. So the story is well mapped out, I think, for people at this stage. In his favour, and I suppose by way of explanation of the 1-month ban, Anthony Davies pointed out the evidence, which included a statement from the team doctor to verify Cronin's version of events. There was a copy of the prescription that the doctor emailed to the pharmacy. The copy of the email sent to the pharmacy was also put forward. There was a pharmacy statement confirming the error. There was a copy of pharmacy's medication dispensing form showing the incorrect name and that it was given to James Cronin. There were photos of the product labels, packaging and leaflets. There was video footage of the player in the pharmacy as he described it. And the Cologne lab, which did the test, said that everything was scientifically plausible, i.e. what was in his system was consistent with his version of events. And therefore, they concluded it was unintentional, which means that your starting point is a 2-year ban. And so you're into the realm then of mitigating circumstances. They said, as you rightly pointed out, Kieran, they couldn't put forward a finding of no fault. They put forward a finding of no significant fault. So against him, what goes against him here, and Brendan Fanning outlines this in his piece as well, James Cronin didn't ask the doctor, what antibiotics are you giving me? The doctor effectively just said, I'm prescribing you with antibiotics, and James Cronin didn't ask what they were. He didn't ask for a copy of the prescription, so he didn't go into the pharmacy with a copy of his own prescription. He presumably turned up and the email had arrived and he said, I'm James Cronin, can I have my prescription? And he was given what he was given. He'd been given this treatment before, and this was the first time that he had 2 medications in his prescription as opposed to 1, and the EPCR understandably say, well, that should have raised concern. He should have said, well, why am I getting 2 medications here instead of the usual 1? Fourthly, they say the player had never taken prednisol before. He didn't carry out any research. He didn't Google it. A simple Google, they say in the report, would have shown that it was banned. The leaflet says it's a steroid medicine. So again, the elements of strict liability come in here. So that's what goes against him. What went for him, and this is presumably how we go from 2-year ban down to 1 month, is that he consulted professionals. So he consulted his team doctor. He got his medication from a reliable source, the pharmacy. The labels on the packaging contained, and they have the name redacted, but we're presuming it's close to James Cronin or J. Cronin. So he thought it was for him. And Anthony Davis, towards the end of the summary, expressed some sympathy for the player. He said, I'm of the view that the player's level of fault was low, talked about these being specific and unusual circumstances, and they certainly are. And therefore, considering the body of evidence provided by the player, they went down to 1 month. Now, there are, Cliona, I know, multiple examples of athletes elsewhere who have been in similar situations and received longer bans. We went through a few of them on the show. So, on the one hand, James Cronin can count himself extremely unlucky for this set of circumstances to have happened the way they did. On the other hand, there is no doubt the ban could have been worse.
Yes, and I believe that he holds some responsibility for himself just for not knowing how to check the thing. You know, that's like it's been preached so long by anti-doping, which is players ultimately responsible for what they put into their body. So, like Kieran, I take regular medication. Every time I go to the pharmacy, I look at the receipt. I check what I've got is exactly what the doctor had prescribed for me. Partly because I'm putting it to claim tax back on it eventually at the end of the year. So it just shows you different lives. You know, the doctor sends the prescription in for him and he picks it up. You know, he probably doesn't have to do stuff like this because Munster probably take charge of all of that kind of stuff. So it's a very different life, okay? But the one important thing in a professional athlete's life is that they're responsible for anything that turns up in their body, so they have to check it. So I think he was culpable in doing that, and therefore that's why he got a ban, which I think would have been greater. But one of the questions Brendan Fanning raises in Sunday Indo, which is an interesting one as well, is, and this is another, what is anomalous and I suppose is unusual, is that European Rugby who took this case, there was no, they judged it solely on documents. So he was never cross-examined or brought to any sort of a question, if you like, an appeal or anything like that. And I think that's unusual. I think it's unusual and it's not what normally happens, I think, a lot of the time. And again, I would come back to that thing of athletes who aren't involved in teams. They have to defend themselves, and very often the legal costs of defending themselves, you know, or these cases, or having even to get advice, you know, is very difficult for them to afford. And I do think that people in team sports are better supported in these situations. But I would ask again, like, how good is the education system? You know, why did he not know these things? And Brendan Fanning makes the point. He says, you know, the IRFUs, you know, watch this from a distance. And he said, their statement was the RFU's education programme is comprehensive and updated regularly with real-world examples to allow greater understanding. There's a lovely piece of, a word that doesn't necessarily be there. And he says, if you combine the RFU's notion of the real world, there are gaps here because, surely that's what athletes should know. And so you do have to question whether players do know the rules around and take them seriously enough.
Yeah, well, certainly in this case, the report absolutely said under the concept of strict liability, certain things went against him, and it was a lack of due diligence on his part, and hence the ban. On the issue surrounding the case and how it was conducted, we're hoping to speak to Anthony Davies on the show this week. We were in contact with the EPCR last week, and it seems that is going to be possible, so we'll be able to talk to him about the report and how it's conducted. For instance, it may have been absolutely relevant that James Cronin immediately acknowledged he had taken prednisol. He didn't look for a B sample to be tested. He fully acknowledged he had taken it, but didn't realise it had gone against the rules. So perhaps that's part of the story here. That's part of the rationale here. I don't know is what I'm saying. I'm just saying we'll have to find out.
On the anti-doping system, he would immediately have had to declare when he was being tested what he had taken anyway. So they should have had a record of that, and they would have known that from the start anyway, exactly what medicines he had taken.
Well, he certainly admitted to taking prednisol, and I think the reason it was not on the form filled out was that, this is going via Anthony Davies's form, is that the Munster doctor had filled out his form, and the Munster doctor had emailed a prescription to a pharmacy and was understandably therefore under the impression that is what James Cronin had taken. Yeah. And so when he filled out the form, he would have had no reason to suspect James Cronin would have taken prednisol.
No, absolutely not. But my point is
so that's why it wasn't on the form handed over to authorities in advance.
Yeah, but what it demonstrates to me is that we know the Irish anti-doping system is particularly rigorous, and it just shows you sometimes that even though it is, and we're told that all athletes are the same, and the system is the same for everybody. Yeah. In truth, it isn't. If you look at this case. As in, because you have a team looking after certain people. Yeah, you have a team and you have a doctor and you have all those other things that individual athletes don't have. Well, that's just
and
the
so
point.
Maybe individual athletes have to be more on top of their situation. Is that almost the point you're making?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also, if they make a mistake, I believe that they're more punished for it because they don't have these support systems with them. If it's a genuine mistake.
Kieran?
Brendan makes a very important point in this, Joe, in that he points to a line from the Munster statement, which includes a statement from James Cronin that Munster that issued, and is that I volunteered to participate in an educational forum to help raise awareness with other rugby players so as to ensure my experiences can be avoided by other athletes. And Brendan points out that gives you a glimpse how far professional rugby in Ireland is off the pace. Like that an educational program is needed in a professional sport. Like athletes across the board in Ireland are told, and the GA players as well, because they're part of this. They're told about the Air Farm website, that you put anything you're taking into the Air Farm website to check what it is. And that's been the case for years. So now professional rugby, which has been a professional sport for 25 years, is now having to tell James Cronin to go around the country to educate players to check things. Seems off the wall. And why are they so behind the curve in this?
Yeah, well, that's a question maybe the RFU could come out and talk about at some stage. That's on page 3 of the Sunday Independent. Brendan Fanning reflecting on the week that was for James Cronin. The prop, the pills, a chemist and a ban is the headline. We'll take a short break. We've a few more stories to get through with Cliona Foley and Kieran Cunningham.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball. The Pat Kenny Show.
On tomorrow's programme, the latest result from the Citizens Corona Survey. Senator Michael McDowell on easing out of lockdown, Element Pictures on their latest TV series Sally Rooney's Normal People, our Monday expert on staying supple while working from home, as well as all the breaking news.
The Pat Kenny Show.
Tomorrow morning at 9.
On News Talk.
COVID-19 is a major public health emergency here in Ireland and around the world. It's having a big impact on every aspect of our lives. We are now asked to stay at home with limited exceptions. This is especially hard for older people and those who've been advised to cocoon. Being isolated from friends and family is hard for everyone. So right now, it's important that we look out for each other and look after our neighbours. That's why national government, local government and the community and voluntary sectors have all come together to create the Community Call. To make sure that anyone who needs help can get help. And to make sure that people who would like to volunteer in their community can help where they are most needed. If you need help, if you know someone who needs help, or if you'd like to offer help, please call 0818 222 024 or call your local authority Community Call helpline. All the details are live now at gov.ie. Supported by the Government of Ireland.
At Guaranteed Irish, we believe enterprise is at the heart of thriving communities.
Like Pat the Baker, whose staff are delivering freshly baked bread daily across the country. Now is the time to support Irish businesses who work tirelessly and safely to ensure the nation is nourished while we stay safe at home. Guaranteed Irish welcomes companies that are altogether better choices for our communities, so look out for it. Thank you to all the team at Pat the Baker for continuing to stock the shelves. GuaranteedIrish.ie. Altogether better.
We all have a part to play in helping our community. For you, it could be staying home to keep loved ones safe. For us at AIB, it means doing everything in our power to support you. Our dedicated team are here with a range of supports for business and personal customers impacted by COVID-19 and all those cocooning. We're also investing over €2 million to accelerate Ireland's effort to develop a vaccine. Because together, apart, we're all making the difference. Visit aib.ie/COVID-19 for more information. Bank safely in branch, by phone or online. Allied Irish Banks plc is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Hope has never been more important or more fragile. Hope for a brighter future for all of us after COVID-19. It's the same kind of hope that Pieta gives thousands of people in suicidal crisis every year. But with this May's Darkness into Light walks postponed, Pieta urgently needs your support to continue saving lives. So please, donate to the Darkness into Light Sunrise Appeal now. And from your homes, join Electric Ireland and Pieta at sunrise on May 9th. Because during the darkest times, we're brighter together. Join us and donate at darknessintolight.ie. Proudly supported by Electric Ireland.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Welcome back. We have Cliona Foley and Kieran Cunningham reviewing the Sunday Papers. On page 2 of the Sunday Independent, Neil Francis, and when he's in the mood, he can be very funny and brilliant. And he's talking about Simon Geoghegan here and just tells 3 or 4 different stories of Simon Geoghegan, his former teammate, which are brilliant. Not least, I mean, he opens up with a memory of rooming with Simon Geoghegan once upon a time. They were given the choice, the Irish team, to mix up the rooming arrangements, and Geoghegan looked at me and said, "Come on, Large, spend a few days with the geezer." I jumped at it. It was comedy gold for 3 days and the priceless commodity of uninterrupted sleep as well for 3 nights, because the Claw had a reputation for being the loudest snorer. And he tells one story, for instance, where at 10 o'clock they were hungry in the room, so they got a club sandwich and chips. The chips were covered in salt, the rasher in the sandwich the saltiest bacon I've ever consumed. Late into the night I woke up with a dry throat and a furry tongue, all that salt. I was parched. I got out of bed quietly, tiptoed to the bathroom, didn't turn on the light, but I poured myself a glass of water. I glugged it down, and I remember thinking that even the water in the Berkeley Court Hotel was salty. I poured another glass and drank it before slipping back into blissful slumber. The first kick didn't hurt, but the second certainly did. Oi, Large, where the F are my contact lenses? I looked at the empty glass and came to the conclusion that I had somehow managed to drink them in the middle of the night. They were these special soft contact lenses, which he had left in saline solution in the glass. They cost £220, and they were the only remaining contact lenses he had with him. Simon was minus 5.65 short-sighted, which meant he was practically blind without lenses or glasses. And not long before kick-off, replacement pair were found. They weren't the right prescription, but they would have to do. Simon scored a try and generally ran amok, even though he was half blind. The following morning, he was on his way back to London. "Cheers, Gio. See you, Franz. I'm sorry about the lenses. That's all right, Chief." Frano says, "Do you want them back?" And that's how the piece starts, Cliona. And there's a couple of more brilliant stories in there about Simon Geoghegan, who really is not somebody we hear enough from by the sound of things.
Oh, it's a fabulous piece, really good. And like former players, particularly from the non-professional era, you know, they have such great stories to tell. And when he tells them well, Neil Francis does a brilliant job. And so I don't want to ruin the rest of the piece for people, except to recommend that they read it. I saw Gagan was so good. People who haven't seen him, he was just a god to me. I once went on holidays to England and driving, took the car over, myself and my partner, we went to Bath. It may or not have been a coincidence that it was Simon Gagan's first game for Bath. And when we got there, we went looking for tickets the night before, and the game was sold out. It was one of the earliest games, I think, that Sky Sport did, because I remember, or that was being televised live. And I remember because the start of the game was delayed because of live TV. But we couldn't get tickets the night before, and somebody then said to us, do you know what? They give away the OAP tickets. They sell them off in the morning if you go down to the ground early. So we did, and we got in on, we bought 2 OAP tickets. I was younger then, I didn't qualify as an OAP. And we went to the game. And I remember he didn't get much of the ball, but it was worth it just to be there. And everybody in the ground wanted to see Simon Gagan. It was his first game for Bath. He was sensational. His feet were magic. He just had incredible balance, incredible hands. He was an absolute superstar, but he didn't do a lot of media and not a lot of known about him. And it's just the strength of his character comes across in the brilliant stories that are told here. I didn't realise how tough he was.
He's made of steel, isn't he, Kieran? And there's even, without going into the same detail as I did with the previous story, you know, Neil Francis recounts when they lost 15-3 to Scotland, and in the dressing room, and Noel Murphy walks in and says, don't worry, boys, loads of positives out there. And Neil Francis writes, a voice from Clapham shouts, name them, name one. And he gets off his seat, throws the jersey on the floor and walks out the dressing room, and the following week slams the team in the Sunday Independent, goes to town on the team, and there's absolute uproar. And Neil Francis, it turns out, defends him to the team when they wanted to kick him out of the squad. And ultimately they win some games towards the end of that championship. But as Cliona says, there is a granite as steel to this man that, you know, you mightn't associate with flamboyant kind of a winger, but it certainly comes across in this piece. And he had the misfortune to play at a time when he wasn't getting much of the ball. Yeah, because I like Cliona. I would have really looked up to him. I think of all the Irish rugby players, he's probably my favourite, because maybe in more recent years it's easier to be attracted to a Brian O'Driscoll or Paul O'Connell or Jonathan Sexton and see them as something else. But they've always had quality teammates around them. Simon Gagan, for a large part of his career, didn't. Like, it used to be often said that, you know, he'd nearly die of frostbite or exposure out in the wing, waiting for a pass from game after game. But I remember when I moved to London and watching the Ireland-England game in 1994 in a pub in London. It was just full of Irish, a lot of Irish people there and a fair few English people. And that was when he got a famous try in the left-hand corner after a brilliant move. The move was actually called Sullivan. Eddie O'Sullivan came up with the move, I think when he was at London Irish. But also that day, he made a catch. I think it's referred to by Neil Francis in the piece as well. He made a catch deep in defence and pivoted and galloped up the wing. Like, he had so much to his game. But he referenced, one of the things that's interesting about this piece, Joe, is he references a few interviews I remember reading. I remember reading the David Walsh interview that he talks about their encounter with drunken Millwall fans after a League Cup quarter-final on a train. But he makes it come across as very fresh, you know, retelling the story in his own words. But he was eating some kind of cake. What kind of cake was it again? Fruit
but
cake.
He was eating a cake on the train, and this bullet-headed Millwall fan basically demanded the cake of him, reached out to grab it. And Simon Gagan told him, if you do that, you know, I'm going to take the neck of your head off your shoulders. And he had dozens of people behind him. And David Walsh later asked him, like, why, you know, are you not worried? Why not just let him have the cake? And he said, if I let him have it, he would have come back looking for more trouble. Anyway, it was my effing cake. And that kind of stuff. But there's two little things here. He mentions a brilliant catch he made from Rob Andrew Garryowen, which I think was the 94 game that I referenced. Yeah. And he also references catching a baby when his wife was giving birth. And baby, he gave birth. He helped his wife give birth, and the baby slipped out of his breath. It was going to slip onto the floor, and he caught the baby. Yeah. It's a remarkable story. He also, there's a little line at the end. I didn't know this. That is, Neil Francis mentions his girls are flyers at Athletics Ireland. Yeah. Look at. I think we might get into that.
be a follow-up.
Yeah, well, they've got to have speed in their genes, that's for sure.
So did Gagan just do very little media aside from maybe that Sunday Independent interview where he slams his teammates, or the David Walsh interview? Was he generally not heard of much in his day?
Yeah, I don't remember him doing an awful lot. I remember that David Walsh piece as well, but he didn't do an awful lot, is my memory. But now
it was very different as well then, Cliona. Like now they're all on a rota. They're all on a rota, so they all do interviews regularly. Back then, it was the amateur era. He was a solicitor living in England, playing rugby part-time. So outside of the odd feature interview, there weren't many, players weren't interviewed anywhere like as much as they're interviewed now.
Yeah, but it would much more like it would have been much more like the old GA situation. But we would have had way more access to GA players there, and you wouldn't really have had access to people who were living abroad. Really, very little then, And as you say, he was trained to be a solicitor, who was based in England. So the only times he probably did interviews was if somebody got him over there, came home. But it was nothing like now, and he wasn't a guy that you actually saw many interviews with. But this what really comes across in this was his incredible strength of character, and because he was such a lithe player, you almost associate that delicateness that he had on his feet, and you kind of associate that his personality would have been like that, and clearly it wasn't.
Yeah, plays like flamboyant winger, behaves like gruff second row, seems to be the general
the other thing, Joe, across the media the last month or so, there's been a huge amount of nostalgia because people are desperate for content.
Oh, I know, Kieran. I know.
Yeah, I don't. But I've become fairly weary of it. I know we all had to do it because we all have space to fill. But this is a different kind of nostalgia piece. Like, it's not hooked around a date or something. This is a guy I know I played with. This is what he was like, and it's brilliant. Like it's quite long. It's a full page, and there's a lot of reading in it. And I think it shows. Like, sometimes I could take or leave Neil Francis, but when he's good, he can be very, very good.
Yeah, it's the value of that. It's the value of that personal anecdote, isn't it? That he has something to tell us that somebody else doesn't have, because he shared a room with him and he knew him really well. He knows his family, he knows his wife, he knows his kids. That's the great value of it. And you're right. I'm wondering, are we all? I mean, I feel I'm just amazed really at the quality of newspapers and of yourselves and radio at the moment, and off the ball and elsewhere, that you're managing to still produce so much on sport when we've no live sport. And there's some fantastic nostalgic stuff. But then there is also, you're becoming a bit weary of it now as well, because there's so much of it. And this one definitely has something fresh.
Yeah, no, it's really, really good. It really is. So that's Neil Francis on Simon Gagan. Don't worry, Cliona, we just have about 8 months more of nostalgia pieces and then we'll start getting moving again. Soon we'll be doing nostalgia pieces about, remember that time in COVID when we did all those nostalgia pieces?
Top 10 nostalgia pieces.
Yeah.
Definitely, we need a listicle on nostalgia, definitely.
So they're the two rugby pieces, the James Cronin piece we picked out, and Simon Gagan as well. Jonathan Northcroft on scouting in the Sunday Times. I'm not sure which of you stuck that one in, but it was an interesting.
Yeah.
If not,
fascinating.
Did you? Yeah. I have to say it was about what I expected to be happening in the scouting world at the moment. What jumped out at you?
Well, it's just. When I say it was fascinating, a lot of it isn't that new to me, but I think there's a lot of people that don't really understand how scouting works now. And I think it's good to see it expressed, because Jonathan actually wrote a very good piece. I think you remembered before, Joe, you talked about in the show about how Liverpool scouted Van Dijk.
Yeah.
And how I think they watched him 40 times in the flesh, along with all the video analysis, etc. They talked to people who knew him. The same with Klopp. Like, they actually stalked Klopp. Like, they were in a hotel lobby watching him, how he interacted with other people. That this is the level of detail that that goes into now. But he talks to, in this piece, Jonathan talks to a guy, Salvador Carmona, who's involved with an analytics firm called Drib Lab. And what struck me, he gives us an example. He said, if a club comes to him and says, we want a new Harry Kane, and he just makes a few taps into his database, and he comes up with a list of people who have the kind of attributes that Kane has, but they would be very affordable, that are under, they're maybe 2021, they're under the radar now. And I remember reading this around Mo Salah, that a lot of clubs now, they don't look at, the finished article. Like, when with all the analytics around Salah and his stats, they indicated potential. They didn't indicate this is a guy who scores 30 goals every year and is going to be Football of the Year and be a contender for Ballon d'Or. It indicated that he's not quite there, but he's doing things that with the right coaching and the right environment and maybe a year older, he will suddenly take off. And that's what but one of the interesting things about it, I thought it was a lot more common. Like in this, he says a quarter of the Premier League clubs don't use analytics at all. And a quarter of them have just one-man basically scouting operations. Or, the main guy in charge is just one person. So, because even I was reading recently about Bill Shankly, reading a lot about Bill Shankly for a thing, and before he signed Ron Yates, who was his captain in the 1960s, he went to watch him personally 20 times. Like that level of detail was going on 60 years ago. Yeah. And it's amazing now some clubs, and the clubs that are left behind, are doing that. But he does reference here the clubs, Leicester's referenced here, and Watford, Atletico Madrid, Udinese, Red Bull Salzburg, Red Bull Leipzig, as clubs who are very good at unearthing the superstars of the future, or very good players of the future, even.
Yeah. No, it is. It's very interesting. It's Jonathan Northcroft, page 22. I mean, so they use the example, as you said, of, well, find me someone like Harry Kane. So, like, they don't search for specific players anymore, or players who catch the eye. They search for a profile. This is what I want. Yeah. Find me those players who fit that profile. So Jonathan Northcroft says, OK, I want Harry Kane for 50 million. What are you going to do for me? And, he puts in his various attributes, and out come the names. Like Tammy Abraham comes out as maybe top of the pile, age 22. Anthony Martial is on the list as well. Lukaku is on the list as well. I've never really looked at Tammy Abraham, Martial, Lukaku and Harry Kane personally and thought they're all in the same mould. Not especially. I mean, they're not miles apart either, obviously. They're a certain height and a certain size and probably play a certain way. And to be fair to this guy, he does absolutely concede that this is not the be-all and end-all. He does concede this is almost like a starting point. And thankfully, football and recruitment has not got to a point whereby you just, put in your bit of data, you get your players, you put in the bid. I still think there is an emphasis on football on going to see the players, judging them with your own eyes, and even maybe spying on them to see what their personality is like. So it sort of seems like where this fits into football now is that this is a brilliant way to sift through 130,000 players from 180 competitions and give you your 10 to go and watch. But beyond giving you your 10, I still think it's up to you and up to your eye and up to your intuition a lot.
Yeah, and he admits that, Joe, doesn't he, too? Because he does say in it, data should give you the first filter, but then you have to go watch the players and find out all the things data can't tell you. And to me, very often they're the most important things: body language, family situation, behaviour, how a player is off the ball. There are certain things that you can't measure. And it's like, if you took it back to Simon Gagan, do you know what I mean? You could do a profile of Simon Gagan, but nowhere in that profile might it tell you about that strength of character and that individuality that he had.
I wonder, Kieran, will we ever get there? I know I think it's MIT, they're trying to, you measure various things and predict which team is going to win. They're trying to measure team spirit, and it's like the next frontier. It's near impossible. But like if you say to me, Harry Kane and Anthony Martial, I can tell you right away a big difference in those two is their personality.
Yeah, but it's funny because I mentioned Shankly, just a bit beaten up about him, so he's in my mind. And one of the things Shankly used to say, he was once asked, what do you look for in a player? And he said, I look at their parents. So that's, he actually puts store in, this guy's background and just how his character has been shaped and, the impact that can have on his football. But the way Jonathan Northcroft, this piece finishes up, I think is interesting. And that the guy says, the clubs he pays special attention to are the best clubs in the weaker leagues, like Basel in Switzerland, Shakhtar Donetsk, Celtic, Olympiacos, Sparta Prague. And he says, why? Because 1, their players tend to be very good. 2, they compete in Europe. And 3, they're likely to get work permits because they would probably already be internationals. And he gives examples. So that was Salah at Basel, Wanyama at Celtic, Van Dijk was at Celtic as well, but he would have been an EU player anyway, and Mane at Salzburg. But that's something I've never considered. But I think a lot of people would never have thought about that. But that's one of the things people would look at.
I didn't know a lot about this data analytics and with recruiting players. So I found this a really interesting piece, Joe. I think some people would if they don't know much about it. And I thought that point that Kieran has just underlined about the clubs, why he can target in those particular clubs. I thought that was really interesting as well. It's a good piece.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And the interview finished with this guy having to get off the phone from Jonathan Northcoff because there was a French club calling and he needed to go and do some work for them. So business is clearly good. So let's go from this in terms of opposites then. So if this is looking at the hard data of players, then Dennis Walsh with Paul Tierney, the former Cork hurler, is about spirit and personal awakenings and personality and just the total opposite of stuff you can measure on paper. So what's this about?
Kieran, do you want to take that? He was a former Cork player, a Cork hurler, and he would have won a medal with the Cork team of 2004.
Should I remember him? I don't really remember him.
I don't remember him, certainly, so I don't know whether Kieran does.
Okay. Well, Cork fans might. Paul Tierney is his name, so he was a hurler.
Yeah, and he left hurling and he went into adventure racing, really. And it's a very good piece about just why he's got so into endurance sport and how he got involved in it. There was a name in this that I recognised because it's referenced that he was living at one stage in the Lake District with his partner Sarah McCormick, and she would be really, really well known in Irish athletic circles because she was a brilliant mountain runner, and our female top mountain runner at one point. But he made a film on what he did last summer, and it was he scaled 214 peaks in a little over 6 days in an endurance feat, and he did it in, what was the time at the end? The clock stopped at 6 days, 6 hours and 5 minutes, nearly 7 hours faster than the guy who had done it before, and he did it. And he's just he left hurling. It's really interesting. He said. I was never terribly talented at any sport. I've always been a trier, but I was determined. And he says that, he says something which I thought was unusual. He said, people often ask that question about what would you done. Do you have any regrets in your life? And he says people who say they don't have any regrets in their life actually are wrong, because he said, why would you not have regrets? You've hardly done everything perfectly. I definitely have regrets about hurling. If I had been better at managing the mental side, I might have done a lot better. I'd love to have played in an All-Ireland final, not just sat on my backside and watched other people doing it because he was a sub. I was obviously happy that Cork won, but I felt like a fraud. I was getting a medal for doing nothing. I felt I never deserved it. And so then when he took up endurance sports and endurance running, that's how he felt he's proved himself. I don't agree with that. I think lots of people can have no regrets about their lives, and it's not a bad thing.
Well, I was with him. I don't know how you couldn't have regrets.
Well, I suppose it's what you value in your life and what you regret. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting philosophical point, but I do think you can be somebody who has no regrets about your life. You may be sorry that certain things didn't happen, that you didn't, but regretting is something that eats away. Is regret not something that eats away at you?
No, I'm okay with my regrets. I just think, if any of us were to go through life again, I would do 1,000 things differently. You just, how could you get it right first time around? If I sit there and think about my life, I'll send you a text later on with my top 20 regrets, and you can see what I mean. We can have a glass of wine. We can chat on Zoom. We'll talk about it. It's.
If you could start all over, would you still be sitting in that seat?
Well, possibly not. I don't know. I do. When someone says, I've no regrets, and maybe to be fair, they mean, well, if I hadn't made certain mistakes, I wouldn't be the person I am today, and they've all shaped me, and I like who I am.
Yeah.
So therefore, I'm glad. The mistakes were necessary. I understand that, but when he says, if you don't have regrets, you obviously haven't really examined what you've done in your life. When I read that, I thought that's a great line, and I believe that. I think that's true. I don't know how anyone couldn't regret at least a handful of things they have done or chosen. Kieran Cunningham, how many regrets do you have in your entire life?
This show isn't long enough. I know this show is 5 hours long. It still isn't long enough.
We'll do a nostalgia piece on your top 10 regrets from the 90s and 80s.
I've made lots of mistakes in my life, and
okay.
I've made wrong decisions probably in my life. But I don't regret them, because to me, when you use the word regret, it seems to intimate, in the context he's using in particularly, someone that's eaten away at you. You know what I mean? And I think that's maybe the difference. But maybe that's what separates people who have this incredible, and he clearly has incredible, because he makes that point, and it's a really good piece about endurance running and mountain running, about how most of it is mental, you know, and maybe I'm just weak mentally.
No, far from it.
The way he finishes up, Joe, is and it's something I've thought about a fair bit. When you look at, you know, people who are down the list on squads on All-Ireland final day, and, you know, what does it really mean to them? They've put up in so much work and trained so much, and they're obviously happy, you know, they're part of it in a way, and they're happy for their teammates and happy for the county. But they must feel very excluded as well. And he says he felt like a fraud, you know, the day Cork won the All-Ireland. You know, he said, I got a medal for doing nothing. I never felt I deserved it. And I think there's a lot more people that feel that way than you ever hear about. And it's a very strange situation to be in. I think some of them end up being a little bit haunted by it. That they look at that medal and they think, you know, why do I have that medal? What did I really do for it?
Yeah, I've no doubt. By the way, the 214 peaks he mentioned are in the Lake District, if you're wondering. There's a set of peaks called the Wainwrights, because there was an Alfred Wainwright more than 50 years ago who illustrated the Lake District in 7 volumes of books, more than 2 million copies sold. Each peak, except one, rises to more than 1,000 feet. And so he did all of these as consecutively, 214 peaks, and did it in an exceptional time as well. And they've made a video of it. I must try and get the film, because it sounds like it'd be great. It sounds like he went through hell and back as well.
Yeah.
There's a scene in the film he references where effectively he's just saying, I can't go on, I'm in pieces, I need to stop, and I'm not enjoying this, why the hell am I doing it? He does say of his hurling that I've thought a lot about this side of things. That's the mental strength required for hurling. And I suspect when you're climbing 214 peaks, you have a lot of thinking time. I've gone back and I've thought about how I was set up when I was hurling mentally. It was one of my biggest weaknesses, my mental strength. If I did something wrong in the first couple of minutes, that used to just eat away at me. My mind would be thinking about not missing the ball. I was worrying about messing up. And Dennis writes, in ultra running over extreme distances, you can manage your body by controlling your thoughts. And so that's something maybe that he's found a certain enjoyment in doing. So he's a very reflective
I think
character.
that's the fascination about adventure racing, and particularly endurance. You know, the ultra stuff is really what is fascinating is the mental element of it. And I know, having talked to particularly ultra runners and people who do these ultra, 24-hour and 48-hour things, is they actually start hallucinating, and that becomes really interesting when you talk to them about that and what they hallucinate about and how you drive the body so hard, that actually it's the mind that takes over, and then it's a battle with your mind. And he captured that quite well. And Rory O'Connor did a piece yesterday in the Irish Independent with Damien Brown, another a rugby player who has chosen to go into adventure sport, and was very interesting piece as well. But they are fascinating. And I think people are always interested in what makes people do these things, and then how do they manage when their body is pushed to the very extreme.
Yeah, well, it's on page 20 of the Sunday Times. Paul Tierney is that hurler's name from Cork. Won in All-Ireland in 2004, and now he's doing extraordinary things when it comes to long-distance racing, I suppose, for want of a better word. Send your regrets into 53106. You'll get us that off the ball on Twitter as well. You can read them out on air. Let's see what we got out there. Let's empty the closets.
You never extend your mind, Joe. Never.
Yeah. Oh, listen, I'll send you mine later. I'd say minimum about 3,000 regrets. So, what we finished with? We'll two last pieces, if we can squeeze them in. We've about 6, 7, 8 minutes, so really not much time. And I know you both, Kieran, you mentioned JJ Hanrahan in the Mail on Sunday, and I know Cliona mentioned Tommy Conlon's piece on the Bertie Bowl, which is a great old read as well. So do you want to just give a nod towards them and explain what caught your eye or why you like them, Kieran? JJ Hanrahan?
Yeah, I'll just go on JJ Hanrahan. It's just
the next big thing.
What's that?
The next big thing.
But JJ have for Munster, obviously, it's a heavy shirt because of the people who've worn it before. When you wear that shirt, there's certain expectations, and he makes no secret of it that he found things very difficult. So, like it goes back to what should they get the Racing '92 game
where he missed the drop goal.
Yeah. When he missed the drop goal and finished 21-21, he says, for any person who thinks they have a mind that wanders, when you're a game like that, there's no thinking. You're so immersed in the moment, you actually realise how much you miss it when you're out of it for this long, and how much you crave that feeling of... I'm mixed up here. That was a different game. No, but he's talking about that miss, and he said, look, you can look at it two ways. As a 10, you take it all on yourself. That weight of the team on yourself, and when the opportunity comes, you have to nail it. That's the bottom of the line. At the end of the day, I'm a big believer, you're never too far away from a good game or a big game. You're always in the middle there somewhere, so that's kind of the way of focus on it. We got to a certain level and had the opportunity to win it, but we didn't take it. But he does say that he was crippled by the weight of Munster history. It's used as a headline. And it's something that you see with a lot of big teams, whether it's Liverpool or Manchester United or it's the Kerry footballers or Kilkenny hurlers, that the tradition can be a great help, but it can also be a massive burden.
Yeah.
Because you are supposed to live up to a certain standard.
Well, it's funny, when the drop goal attempt happened this season, just because it was a Munster number 10 and because of everything O'Gara did, you just sort of presume, well, a Munster number 10 makes those drop goal kicks, and that adds to the pressure, and that adds to the fallout afterwards as well. You're instantly compared to Ronan O'Gara, whether you like it or not. O'Gara would have got that kick.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the part of it that jumped out at me as well. And I also was asking in my head, well, who was helping him with the mental side of the game, and how did he recover, and where did he, how has he improved his mental strength? Because that is, you're absolutely right. Like it was the thing that jumps out, is this guy who was so brilliant in World Under-20s, World Cup, and was going to be the next big superstar, that he actually struggled with the burden of Munster on his shoulders, if you like.
Yeah, I presume when things get back underway, Joey Carberry will be fit again. So maybe he's not quite missed his window. I don't want to put it that starkly, but he might have had more game time if this hadn't.
Well, he's 27 actually. That surprised me, Joe. Yeah, because I thought he was younger than that. It's funny when I looked at it and said he's 27. It just shows you the ups and downs of a professional athlete's life. Things can very quickly pass you by. You have to really grasp those opportunities. That's where the pressure comes from, I suppose.
Yeah. If you're wondering, by the way, what they're all doing at home, the rugby players, they have a half rugby ball. So one side of it is like a rugby ball, the other side of it is flat. So they're able to throw it against the wall and get it back to themselves. That's how they're practicing. Stephen Larkham, he says, has been setting skill tests while they're at home. Players record them on their phones and they send them back into Stephen Larkham, and he has a look at them, which is kind of interesting. So, Cliona, on page 5, Tommy Conlon, he was prompted to write this because there was a Scannell documentary on the Bertie Bowl.
There was, I watched it.
I didn't see this.
And any of us who covered the Bertie Bowl, or this notion of there was this proposal to build this 80,000. Look, it's a very complicated piece. He gets into the politics of it, and it's well worth a read if you've often heard about the Bertie Bowl and not understood the implications of it and how it linked in with the FAI and also with the GAA in opening Croke Park for, there was lots of stuff in it. It's fascinating, but it's the quality of the writing that is just so good in it. Like, he noticed, which I did as well, in the interviews in the piece, Bertie says, he says, what did they call it? The Bertie Stadium or whatever, the Bertie Stadium. Nobody ever called it that. It was known universally as the Bertie Bowl. But here he was pretending he couldn't remember it for some reason best known to himself. There are bits of this that made me howl out loud with laughter, even though he gets, so much into it, and it's really, really pointed and brilliant. But there's one, for an example, to make people want to go to read it, he says, anyhow, no one suspected that the man in the cheap anorak was suffering from a bad dose of Oedipus complex until he launched his fantasy upon an unsuspecting nation in the autumn of 1998. It's a brilliant piece, really, really good, and really good for people to understand the history.
Part of the madness around that time, not just with the Bertie Bowl, but they should be in a museum somewhere. There's at least 3 scale models of stadia in Dublin that were never actually built. There was the Bertie Bowl in Abbottstown, Aircombe Park, and then when the move was in place to bring Wimbledon to Dublin, the Dublin Dons were supposed to play in a new ground in Neilstown in Dublin. So it just summed up that there was this amount of hubris out there, that everybody wanted a stadium of their own. Like, it was a country with a pretty dilapidated Croke Park and Lansdowne Road at the time. But, there were 3 different groups battling to have their own stadium. And now we've got a situation where we have an 80,000 stadium and a 50,000 stadium, and we don't know when people will be allowed to go back and how many people will be allowed to go back into them. But in one way, it doesn't mention here, Bertie did get his way in one way with Abbottstown, because Abbottstown was his idea, and the campus now is very impressive.
It's brilliant.
You have the Institute of Sport, the FAI moved out there with training pitches, GA have a base there, rugby there's rugby based there, swim. There's the aquatic centre. You know, there's so many different facilities out there now. There is a big like it actually.
Of so much better use than another 80,000 stadium that we didn't need, that we don't need. Exactly. So the place, you're right, it's a brilliant place now.
They never tackled the lack of public transport, or it's very difficult to get unless you're driving to, and I think that's something to sort out. Particularly the European Cross Country Championship is supposed to take place there this year, and that could end up being, if it does go ahead, be the only major sporting event in Ireland this year. So that's in December.
It could be the only major athletics event actually in Europe this year. Yeah.
Well, I agree totally. I wasn't that into this piece when Cliona, you suggested it, and I said, okay, I'll get it. I stuck into this, and it's a really good read because I wasn't fully aware of all the machinations. Like I wasn't aware of how Aircon Park was made to just go away with 11 million quid given to domestic football, and suddenly the FAI drops Aircon Park, and he's got the minutes of that meeting on how a few other political machinations went on, and then there is just the quality of writing as well. So like he says at one stage, in reality, Bertie was determined to build a stupendously expensive white elephant for his own honour and glory. But in his imagination, the man who loved the Dubs and Man U and the few pints was thinking big. It was everyone else who was thinking small. Yes, he was thinking very big. Bigger than the big fella and the long fella put together. Bigger even than the Big Lebowski. It wasn't the health service or the education system that was going to be world class. It was his big swinging Mickey of a Coliseum.
So I mean, if it wasn't so serious, it would be hilarious. But he manages somehow to combine both elements, and it's a super piece.
Dermot in Dublin says, please do something and get Simon Gagan on the show. As Cliona says, he was a god. Just watch the YouTube clips. As a young back in the early 90s, I idolised him. I used to be in a daze watching him train back in the days of Ireland training on the Lansdowne back pitch after our Lansdowne Cubs training. If only he played in this age. A true Irish rugby legend, underappreciated. We have tried. Trust me, Dermot, we have tried. We have bullied Keith Wood into trying. We'll try again. Maybe he'll do it. So, guys, thanks so much for doing that, for taking the time. It's strange doing this remotely, but it was great to have you along for the papers again. Cliona Foley, thank you. And Kieran Cunningham, thank you as well. Stay safe, guys. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you.
There we are. We'll take a short break. That was the papers for today. It will be podcast in full in the usual places. Up next, what I promise you is a really good interview with Lee Dixon, talking about his Arsenal days, the players he played with, the managers he played under, comparing George Graham, who was standing on the pitch with them and turning them 5 degrees left and 5 degrees right so everything was perfect, to Arsene Wenger, who was just telling them to go out and play and creating more of a vibe and an atmosphere. Loads of great stuff from Lee Dixon on the way between 3 and 4 o'clock.
The Sunday Papers